Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we want to continue talking about the subject of installing TrueNAS Core on a number of domestic turnkey network attached storage solutions. What that means in real terms is that a number of the NAS solutions you see in the market these days from brands like Asustor, who are the focus of today's video, provide a hardware and software solution, but it is ready to go, much like when you buy a laptop or a ready-built PC rather than buying all the components yourself and a copy of Windows. These are solutions where the CPU, the memory, the storage, the whole thing has been designed for you already and with 24/7 utilization in mind, but they also include their own software. And maybe you utilize TrueNAS already and you want to go back to it, or you found that the software that the system arrives with isn't quite the right software for you, and you've looked at open source free software like TrueNAS Core and gone, I want me some of that. A number of you want to be able to change the software that these systems arrive with, such as this, the Asustor Asustor 4, and change it from Asustor's ADM software and over to TrueNAS Core. And in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. It's going to be a step-by-step guide. There should be a full written breakdown guide of all the images and the download links in the description over on NAS Compares, but I'm going to go through every single step. And the first thing we have to do is tell you exactly what are the things you're going to need for this. Now, not all Asustor NAS devices are built equally, and indeed you're going to need certain specific designs and architecture of Asustor NAS in order to change the OS from ADM over to TrueNAS Core. Not just power, it really isn't. There's one very key factor you're going to need. You're going to need an Asustor NAS that has an HDMI output there on the rear. What that generally means is you're going to be utilizing a dual or quad core embedded graphics processor. Usually you're going to be looking at Intel Core processors, i3, i5, i7, or you're going to be looking at Pentiums or Celeron processors there. And again, you're going to need to go for one of those CPUs because they have embedded graphics, but moreover, they have an HDMI output, something that will become very clear later on. The next thing you're going to need is at least 8 gig of memory in order to really take advantage of TrueNAS. Now, this system arrives with 4 gig by default, but it can be upgraded quite substantially. And indeed, later revisions of this series all go to 16 and even in some cases 32 gigabytes of memory upgrades there. Now, even though this has 4 gig and I'm going to upgrade it as 4 gig, you will see on screen what that means later on during the installation there. But in order to take advantage of a lot of the features of TrueNAS Core and its ZFS architecture on FreeBSD, you need more memory because of things like inline compression and inline data deduplication. In other words, on-the-fly processes. Now, also with this, you're going to need some storage media. Now, you can reverse everything I'm going to show you today. So if you've already got the system with ADM set up and your RAID configuration and all of your data, and you don't want to lose that because you cannot use any of that file, folder, storage structure from ADM in TrueNAS, you can just remove these drives, if you like, that have got all your ADM Asustor stuff, pop them to one side and get some new storage media if you choose. If you try to keep your drives during this system firmware and software change, this data may well be wiped, especially if you want to take advantage of ZFS based RAIDs, like again, RAID Z, triple parity, that sort of thing. So either accept that you're going to wipe the data that's on these and have a backup, of course, or remove these, put them to one side, use some fresh storage media and keep them to one side if you want to reverse your NAS back to ADM, which, by the way, is incredibly easy. This is completely reversible, what I'm going to show you today. Now, with the system, it's also worth highlighting that in order to make the most of this, though the main storage bays aren't the only thing at your disposal. A lot of modern Asustor NASs, again, like the Asustor, also arrive with M2 NVMe slots there inside. Now, why is that important? Because TrueNAS, much like Windows or Mac or any kind of operating system you use, it is recommended that the operating system and the core applications and services of any system you're going to use be on a much faster storage area. And that OS lives separate to the main storage base. Unlike ADM, where the system software and the storage all live on those main bays by default, what you can do with this is choose an Asustor NAS that has an M2 NVMe slot, then buy a low capacity M2 NVMe like this. This is the Titanium Micro TH5300. That's about $40 for the 120 gig model if you choose, and it does go higher, and that's more than enough space here for our Asustor NAS to install TrueNAS on. And again, I'll go through that later on. But if you don't have that, just bear in mind that TrueNAS needs to live on a drive, and whatever drive you put it on, unless you're going to use some creative partition work there, you're going to lose access to that drive. So if you use a drive inside one of these bays, you're not going to be able to use it in the greater RAID. So make sure you choose a much faster SSD or a separate storage area for TrueNAS to live on. Don't use an external USB drive. Because of power failure and system running, it's just not worth it. But again, you'll see that later on in the video. The next thing you're going to need is a USB. This isn't where TrueNAS is going to live when the system is running, but you're going to need to be able to run the TrueNAS installer later on in the video. What that means is you're going to need a USB of at least 8 gig, but you can pick up very affordable 16 and 32 gig FAT32 formatted USBs. I'm utilizing this one. This was about 7 or 8 quid, and it's the SanDisk Ultra Fit. It's a 32 gig USB. You're going to need that to put the TrueNAS installer on board, which you then connect into your Asustor to run it. TrueNAS is an ISO, a digital disk image, but of course there is no CD drive here, so you need to have it on a USB, and later on I'll show you the tools you need to convert that ISO that we're going to download into a USB drive. The last thing we're going to need is a KVM setup, generally regarded as a keyboard video mouse setup. You're not going to need a mouse for this. You need to have a USB keyboard, standard USB, no wireless, no Bluetooth keyboards, because you may need a driver for those to work, and we're going to be running much lower than that of any OS, so drivers are out of the question. And another thing you're going to need is a monitor, an HDMI monitor to connect on that HDMI port there on the rear that we just talked about there. Now again, you can use any HDMI telly, you can use an old computer monitor if you choose. Personally, for this video, I'm going to be using a capture card. This is an HDMI to USB capture card that will allow me to do the recorded footage. So if you have one of those lying around, you can just connect it into the Asustor, and then from there you can run the installation. And you only need to use an HDMI output for the installation and the initialization. After that, TrueNAS can be accessed over the network just like ADM can as well. I apologise for any humming or light fan stuff you can hear in the background. I'm running multiple tests with different devices, but that's really everything you need for this. You just need to have HDMI, keyboard, a USB, and optionally you need to have an SSD for TrueNAS to live on and some storage media to run your TrueNAS server. And that's really it. So the next thing we're going to do now is make our way over to the laptop, where I'm going to show you exactly the tools you need to download and show you how to create our TrueNAS installation USB, which we can use on this system. Let's go. Okay, so we've made our way over to my laptop. We've got our trusty USB ready to go there. I'm going to show you the files we need to download and exactly how to execute them before we make our way over to the NAS once again. A quick thing straight off the bat, you can probably hear a light hum. I mentioned it earlier on in the video. I've got several NASs in close proximity running for different tests, for different videos, so unfortunately it's very hard to remove a lot of that background hum, so I apologise if there's a persistent fan noise there and a kind of light hum at the bottom of this recording. But let's talk about the tools we need. First and foremost, you're going to need TrueNAS Core. If you head over to the URL, which should be linked in the description, as well as the link to the article over on NAS Compares that walks through this is what you're going to need. And again, you can join up to the newsletter and get the link, or if you've already done it, you can go ahead and select no, I've already signed up, and it'll allow you to download version 13.0, the most recent stable release of TrueNAS Core. There you can download that And as you can see, I've already done that in advance for us there. And again, later on there will be a video for TrueNAS Scale, and I've already downloaded it. But for now, what you need is that version of TrueNAS 13 at the time of recording. The next tool we're going to need is called Rufus, R-U-F-U-S, and this is the tool that's going to convert that optical media into a USB bootable for us there. It's completely free. Sorry, I hit the mic there. And on top of that, do remember when you download to select the portable version, because you're not going to need this long term. If you do, you can download the full version, but you can get away with just the simple portable version, which is a double click execution, or so you won't need to install it on your local machine at all. Everything else in terms of download is an optional. So for example, if your USB is larger than 32 gig, then you're going to need to format it to FAT32. But if a drive is larger than 32 gig, default Windows tools will not allow you to do so. So what you'll need to do is download this tool here, FAT32 Formatter, GUI format. This will allow you to format a USB that's larger than 32 gig to FAT32 for our installation there. And lastly, a tool for later on in the video is Advanced IP Scanner, another open source free software that will allow you to scan your local area network and find every device in the network. That is other computers, network printers, laptops, DLNA devices, but in this case what we're looking for later on is our TrueNAS. So that's going to be useful when we want to find our TrueNAS Core Asustor NAS device, find it on a network and interface with it like normal in the web-based GUI. So that's what we need to download, and we've got all of our files. So the next thing we need to do is take our USB and connect it to our laptop. I've connected it there. It should appear on screen very shortly, and it may ask me to format this drive. But I wouldn't bother, don't worry. One of the tools that we're going to utilize is going to format that drive very, very easily. So the next thing we need to open up, we go back in there, is that application Rufus, the one that we just talked about there. That is the app that we're going to need to convert TrueNAS. So double click that. Again, if you saw a black screen there, that's just Windows looking for permission. And as you can see there, it's already listed there our 32 gig module that we've already connected. It may say no name or no media disk image, but it should appear there depending on the state of the format of that drive. The next thing we need to do is go down here, and where it says ISO or disk image, click select. From there, find the installation of TrueNAS, that ISO that we downloaded earlier for TrueNAS 13, and then double click. It may say that it's a hybrid ICO, it's fine, just carry on. And then from there, everything else will be pretty much default by its values, and then just go ahead and click start. And then what this will do is it will completely format the drive as it's warning you, and it will convert that USB into a version of TrueNAS Core, which we can now utilize to install it on our Asustor NAS. It should take no more than a minute to two in order for it to be done, and once it's done, we just safely disconnect that drive and pop it inside our Asustor there. So as you can see, the job has now completed, so we can close that tool, go to the bottom right of our screen, right click the USB there, and now we can disconnect our USB if we choose, which is what we'll do. Now our USB is disconnected and we are ready to install TrueNAS Core on our Asustor NAS. Let's get started, and I'll show you how to set the device up ready for our installation. Okay, time to get our hands grubby here. Now the first thing you want to do is make sure all the wires are disconnected during this next stage of things. Again, also as mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you have data on your drives that are your ADM Asustor setup with the pools and the apps and you don't want to lose them, take those drives and put them to one side and get some brand new drives for this setup. Otherwise you run the risk of losing that storage and all of that setup that you've spent ages doing on your Asustor NAS. Get your new drives if that's the case and introduce them into your system. The next thing to remember is that you have to have that faster drive for the TrueNAS installation. So either install an SSD inside one of these bays that you want TrueNAS to live on, or if you're running a modern Asustor NAS, remove the top of the chassis and access those M2 NVMe slots there at the top. And then from there, all you have to do is remove the screw there out the top and install that M2 NVMe that you plan on using. You don't need two unless you want to have a backup of your installation and run them in, say, a RAID 1, a mirror, if you will. but at least one drive in that M2 slot will provide the fastest kind of TrueNAS installation for you there. And again, when you do this, you will see the USB drive listed as an available drive to install TrueNAS. Do not install TrueNAS on a USB drive. If you do that, it will run TrueNAS poorly and run the risk of an unstable installation there. So as you can see, we've installed our M2 inside there. Next thing we need to do, if you're going to upgrade the memory, by the way, now's a good time to do it. But if you're not going to upgrade the memory, or you don't need to, just slot the lid back on and you're good to go. Put that there. So the next thing you need to do is we'll rotate the device around, is get ready with some of the accessories and peripherals we plan on connecting. So have your keyboard ready. So in my case, it's going to be this USB keyboard here. Again, as mentioned in the intro, you don't need this after the beginning of this video. And again, you connect that in there. If you've got USB 2 ports, I recommend using those just for simplicity. But install those in there and you've got your keyboard all set up. Next thing you're going to need, of course, is the USB drive. This is where we had our installation created there. So we take our installation and we can pop it on the front USB or the rear, it makes no difference. In my testing, I've been using the front mounted USB, but I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. Next thing we need to connect is the HDMI monitor. In my case, again, I'm going to be utilizing a capture card, but you can use a monitor. It's exactly the same, but it's just for my case, when I'm doing the recording that you're going to see shortly, it's easier for me to connect a capture card. I'll connect that in there, and this end is going into my laptop in just a moment. The last things that we need to connect now, because we've got our storage drive, we've got our USB drive, we've got our keyboard, and we've got our visual out, is of course power and the network. Now, when it comes to the network, you don't have to connect this to the network during the early stages of this setup, but I recommend doing it because during the initialization of TrueNAS, it will set up certain defaults based on what it detects. So I would recommend having this connected, even though the bulk of this initialization at the start is going to be local. Having the network in there will assist a lot of the network defaults when a device sets up. And the last thing we need to connect is, of course, the power. But before I connect this, it's worth reminding you, do not just turn this on immediately and then slowly set up. It's a very important step coming up very soon where timing is going to be quite essential. But for now, let's connect our power. The system will probably light up ever so slightly at the top. Don't let it, if it does that, hold down the power button. You need this to be on a cool, cold boot and have it ready. And the next thing you need to do is be set up at your computer and laptop. And the key you're going to need to focus on is the escape key. Because when this boots up, on the HDMI interface, after about 10 seconds, you're going to see the motherboard manufacturer logo. And again, it does differ from device to device. And when you see that, start spamming that escape button. And I'll show you on screen in just a moment to access the BIOS. So that's it, we're all set up. So why don't we make our way over now to the visual interface and I'll show you exactly what you need to do to power this up. Okay, so we've made our way onto my laptop here and we're just going to get ready to boot it. But once again, I know I'm being repetitious, but be ready on that keyboard to spam that exit button. You do not have a wide opportunity here. So again, what I'm going to do is power on the NAS now. You are going to hear those drives spin up. They're Pro Series 8 TBs. So you're definitely going to hear those drives. And again, there's the persistent fans from those other NASs, so I apologize for that. But for now, let's turn on our NAS. I can hear it spinning up. I've just felt the fans there. And again, don't start pressing the escape button until I say so. You'll hear a beep after a short while. You'll also see a splash screen there in just a moment showing the motherboard manufacturer there. And then after that is when we want to start pressing that button. The boot time it takes for the motherboard will differ depending on the one you are using and the power. But I recommend, given that you've got less than 3 seconds to do this, to go ahead and just spam that exit button there. It may seem like I'm doing it unnecessarily, but as you see, we make our way in. The window of opportunity is very, very small indeed. But this is the boot, the BIOS menu there for this particular NAS. Do bear in mind that it will differ depending on the system you're utilizing there. A lot of other NASs we've talked about have used the F12 or delete key. It's very easy to make that mistake. You do need the escape key here. So the first thing we need to do is to scroll down to Boot Manager, tap Enter, and then from here you will see the available list of different drives there. Now ignore where it says TrueNAS there. The only reason it says TrueNAS there for me is because I've already done some installations. You won't have that available on your screen. The one that you need to be looking at is that USB drive there. Now it's very, very important to understand the difference. You've got different systems there. You have got there, for example, the drive that I'm utilizing. You've also got that MMC drive. That is where ADM lives on your Asustor NAS. But what we need to do from the boot manager is to select the USB drive, because what that will do now is force the system to boot from that USB. Now again, when you do this, bear in mind there will be another short window of opportunity to access another menu, so don't move away from your keyboard. This next bit's going to be quite quick. So for now we're going to tap Enter and directly choose to boot from the USB. You'll see a splash screen and go ahead and tap Enter there. There is a countdown which will, if you don't press a button in time, it will assume, if you're lucky, that you want to install it. But if it recognizes another OS on one of those other drives, it can bypass the installation. So when you see that previous screen there with TrueNAS in black and white writing to install Core, make sure you tap Enter quick enough there. So here we are on the initialization screen. So obviously to install, we want to select Install. As you can see, as mentioned at the start of the video, this NAS doesn't have 8 gig of memory, and it does recommend that you upgrade the memory there to at least 8 or even 16 gig to take advantage of all the features. However, I'm just going to proceed for now, but I strongly recommend to you to upgrade higher. So I'll go ahead and click Yes. Now it will ask you to select which drive on the system you are going to install TrueNAS Core onto. Now in my case, I'm going to be aiming for that SSD. So I'm going to select that one, but for you it may be completely different. So when you've chosen the drive you want, tap the space bar to put a star next to it there, and then go ahead and click OK. As you can see, it strongly recommends using a SAS drive, an NVMe or a SATA drive, not using a USB as mentioned earlier. So again, go ahead and click Yes, and then give yourself a password. This is for the root account. So remember, when you want to log into the device as a super user, by default that admin name is root, lowercase ROOT. So you'll need to assign a password for that account, and you'll need this in around about 10 to 15 minutes. Go ahead and then click OK. To navigate these options, just tap the Tab button to cycle through them, and then from there click OK. As you can see, it will ask you if you want it to be booted in UEFI or standard BIOS. Just leave it as default. Most modern motherboards from Asustor will support UEFI for you. Next, if you want to create a swap partition, in the case of what we're doing here today, you're not really going to be utilizing any kind of partitional design. It's not out of the question, but for the sake of simplicity, I would recommend selecting no swap for now. And there you go. It's now going to begin the formal initialization of installing TrueNAS Core on this system. Now, the complexity of the installation and the scale of the installation and the power of the Asustor NAS you're using will change how long this next phase takes. Unlike, say, a TrueNAS scale installation using Linux, which always seems to be a great deal quicker, TrueNAS Core tends to take a little bit longer. Now again, it will depend on your hardware architecture, but for you, what I'm going to do is fast forward to the completion of this installation. Let's go on. And now that initialization has completed, so the next things we need to do is shut down this Asustor NAS and go through a few extra steps on stuff we need to do to get this up and running beautifully. So the first thing we need to do is click Enter there and scroll down to the option to shut down the system in its entirety. I'm going to go for a few reasons why in just a moment, but for now, click Shut Down, and now your Asustor NAS should shut down to a cold boot state. That's really, really important, because the next stage of things is going to be to make sure that TrueNAS becomes the default boot option for this system moving forward there. So wait until you've seen the system spinning down there, and then remove the USB. It's really important to remove this USB drive for the next phase. Leave the HDMI output and the USB keyboard. Pop the USB to one side, get ready on your keyboard again and that escape button, and go ahead and power up your device once again. You'll see the fans spin up. Get ready on your escape key, wait until you see that MOBO flash, the motherboard manufacturer flash there, and then just get ready to tap the escape key. If the escape key doesn't work for you, go ahead and use F12 or delete instead, because those are the keys that are generally used by other motherboards out there to access the BIOS menu. So again, what we need to do is get back into BIOS. Don't worry, you won't have to do this again unless you want to reverse the ADM installation. As you can see, we're back here on that boot menu. So now we've removed the USB drive, so the installation installer is out of the question. But the next thing we need to do is go down to Setup Utility. From here, this is the traditional BIOS that a number of us are used to. And what we need to do is head over to the boot option. Scroll down to the bottom until you see the option SD card /eMMC and then press enter. This is the internal little flash module that has the default version of Asustor's ADM platform that when you boot the device up, it reads first before anything else. What you need to do on here is tap the space bar. If you tap that space bar, as you can see, it removes the X from that box. That means from this moment forward, every time you ever boot up your Asustor NAS, it will no longer try to read ADM internally, and it will go for the next logical drive. In this case, that TrueNAS installation that we just did. Now, later on, if you want to turn your Asustor NAS back to an ADM system, make your way back to this menu, and once again, take your space bar and tap space and put an X back in that box. And that is how we reverse this installation if we need it there. So again, remove the X if you want TrueNAS to be the de facto installation there. When you're ready, tap escape, tap right, and then select exit saving changes. Just go ahead and press the enter bar. What this will do is restart your Asustor NAS, but this time it will read from the TrueNAS installation that we just committed. Save changes, and as you may have heard, your Asustor NAS will click to start the reboot cycle, and there next to me it's just getting ready to reboot, and this time it will read from that TrueNAS Core install base that we put on there, and it will begin the initialization of TrueNAS for us there. You'll also hear it beep in just a moment. We don't press anything this time. Do not press escape, don't press F12, don't press delete. Just let it do its thing now that it's not going to access the Asustor little flash module there, and let it go from where you installed TrueNAS earlier on. And as you can see, it's now booting it. You can leave it for 4 seconds, or you can tap enter or go via serial commands. But what it's going to do now is boot TrueNAS that first time. Now bear in mind while it's doing this that it won't always take this long to boot TrueNAS, but the very first time you install it, it's setting up certain defaults. That's one of the reasons we connected our network cable earlier on. We needed to ascertain its identity on our network by leaving it connected. Now from this point, you largely don't need the keyboard and the HDMI output anymore, because after this you'll be able to access your TrueNAS via the local area network, your LAN. Now when this boot sequence has finished, because I recommend keeping these the keyboard and the monitor at least up and running until the end of the first boot, it will tell us the local network identity of our TrueNAS, generally starting 192.168 on that IP. But as mentioned, if you'd gone to the trouble of installing some of the applications I mentioned earlier, more precisely Advanced IP Scanner, and what I'll do is I'll change what we're seeing here on screen to the screen here for OBS. Go ahead, head back onto those downloads, make sure you've downloaded Advanced IP Scanner, and then when you run Advanced IP Scanner for the first time, allow it to scan your local area network for the devices. Now again, give the NAS around about 3 to 5 minutes to boot, and when it does that, just go ahead with the default settings and click scan, and this will search your local area network for all of the available devices that are there. But for now, let's head our way back into that installation and see how well we're doing. This screen you see here again will be quicker when the system has got TrueNAS Core fully installed and you've booted it up more than once. But for now, let's fast forward to the completion of that installation of TrueNAS Core. Wow, I was going to skip forward in the video, but frankly I'm not even going to cut that last edit out, because here we are, it has finished. And as you can see there on screen, it's got the console set up for us there, and we're also able to see our network identity there. It couldn't be accessed via that network identity there, presumably because that network cable is not connected into a direct interface there. If in the event that you are hit by that same issue of it not identifying that network connection, chances are it's because the cable needs to be reconnected after the initialization of the device. So if this happens, just go ahead, disconnect and reconnect that cable. Otherwise, if you do hit this problem moving forward, then there's an outside chance that the network driver and the network hardware of the motherboard within your particular Asustor may not be compatible with TrueNAS, and if that's the case, then you may need to take advantage of things like USB to gigabit Ethernet adapters that you can pick up for less than £10. But as you can see right now I've reconnected it, it has appeared on the IP113, and if we head over to the browser there, we're able to see that on IP scanner it has found it, and it's arrived on IP ending 113 there. So again, I've chucked that into my web browser, and there we are on the GUI via the web browser of our Asustor TrueNAS system there. So we can go ahead and type in root and whatever password you created earlier on during the original setup, and then click login. And boom, you are now into the graphical user interface of TrueNAS Core there on the Asustor NAS. And as you can see, I'm running this on a J4125 processor there, and we've only got 4 gig of memory, so I do strongly recommend upgrading that if you're going to proceed with this installation, of course. And if you want to start enjoying your experience with TrueNAS, you are going to have to go ahead into the storage area and start creating your pools. So from there, you can go ahead and just click add. From there, click create pool, and you can start adding your drives. In my case, a couple of 8 TBs. I could put that in there. I could put RAID mirror, and then from there, go ahead, add those drives to the combination. We can see that we've got 1 disk of redundancy there, and I can go ahead and click create whenever I'm ready. I'm not going to do that, but for you guys, you can go ahead, create the storage pools you want to go for, and of course, based on the number of drives you use, you'll have different options there for whether you want to stripe or mirror or use 1 disk or 2 disk parity there. And then afterwards, go ahead, head into the plugin section and have a little look at all the little different apps and services that you can take advantage of on your TrueNAS Core installation there. But this has been how to install TrueNAS Core on an Asustor NAS. Once again, you can reverse this by going back into the BIOS and popping a little cross next to the support of their MMC drive there, or the internal flash. From this point, you probably won't need your keyboard and HDMI moving forward. Also, bear in mind that although you're not changing any of the hardware attributes on this, I'm still not 100% clear on warranty and support from the brand by doing things like this, because you are technically now using the device in a way that Asustor haven't really verified that your support covers, or that they say the device can support. So do bear that in mind. If you're doing this on an old Asustor NAS, then it probably doesn't matter anyway, because you're out of the warranty and support. But just bear in mind, if you do this and maybe you tax the system too hard with the ZFS file system, potentially damaging via overuse or overheating some of the hardware components inside, there is an argument that you are now using the system in an unsupported fashion, which may be problematic with supporting from the brand, because everything you do on these systems is recorded there in the BIOS and the logs and stuff like that, so do bear that in mind. But otherwise, there's a full guide link below in the description to the full breakdown of today's installation, that you can get all the download links and stuff like that. So do check that out. Click like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to learn more. We will be doing the same test with TrueNAS Scale, the Linux version of TrueNAS's software on an Asustor NAS. And of course, if you need help choosing the right storage solution for you, then either click subscribe, as we talk about network and data storage every single day, or use the free advice section link below over on NAS Compares, or the community forum where me, Eddie, and others will assist you on asknascompares.com. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.